Fawcett from the Great White North to talk about the Gators being a number 1 seed in basketball. We've gone through a lot on this podcast where the Gators were not even close to being a number 1 seed. And we had Eric on before the season started, said that we had the makings of a good team here, and we'll see what they become. And certainly, in my opinion, one of the best resumes in the country, if not the best, especially considering the end of the year. So, Eric, it's a pleasure to have you back, brother.
Yeah, it's good to be on. I mean, I really did pad those numbers of appearances, I think, earlier in the podcast life, but it's good to be back on because, I mean, man, for all the times that I've been on the show, we have not had a team like this to talk about. That is for sure. Like, I'm going to be honest, like I used to be able to see it in Silk's face when he was trying to muster up any kind of enthusiasm for an 8 or 9 or 10 seed team.
Rough,
you were doing your best, but now there's a legit.
Corey was here like on camera being like, all right, Eric, tell me about this.
I got 3 Bronco jokes.
SEC basketball team.
It was rough, man, but good times ahead, man. We're in a good position right now.
So, Eric, the Gators run through the SEC championship, beating each of their opponents by double digits. And really at no point, there were certainly some runs along the way that some of their opponents had, but really at no point did you ever think that the Gators were in doubt of losing that game. It seemed like the media kept moving the needle on if Florida would be a 1 seed. Would they be a 1 seed already? And then it was, they've got to beat they've got to win at least 1 game. They'll be a 1 seed. And then they got to win the semifinal game. Then they'll be a 1 seed. And then it was like, well, whoever wins between Florida and Tennessee, they'll be a 1 seed. Florida put all of that to bed by winning. But Eric, I mean, just looking at, I want to talk about where Florida's seated, right? So they're the 4th number 1 seed. And I know that a lot goes into that. You're talking about quad 1 victories and what your out of conference schedule looks like. And, Florida's out of conference schedule this year just didn't amount to much. I mean, you had some brands on there. You think Florida got a little, and it doesn't matter, you're still 1 seed. You think Florida got robbed a little bit on being the 4th number 1 seed?
I don't think so. I think for starters, there's going to be a lot of people that'll point to what I said before the season when I certainly didn't think they were a 1 seed kind of caliber team. And people are like, oh, Eric, like, you were so wrong, like how good the team is. And that's awesome. Happy to be wrong on that one. But I'll tell you this, Florida's coaching staff certainly didn't think that they were going to be a 1 seed, because if they did, they would have scheduled a lot better. And that's the thing, is Florida played a really, really soft non-conference schedule where the other teams that got 1 seeds or were in the mix for 1 seeds, such as like an Alabama or Tennessee, and the teams that Florida went to jump, went and scheduled a ton of tough games so that they could build up that equity, so that they could take some losses and still be in a position where, of course, Florida had to do what they did and really roll through the SEC and SEC tournaments to do that. So the other thing too is I think a lot of people that suggest that Florida should be the number 1 overall seed or better are looking at, well, they beat Auburn, who was the number 1 overall seed, head to head. Well, the committee doesn't look at head to head results like that. They also look at, Florida won the SEC, which I'll remind everyone, by any metric, by any evaluators looking at this league, like this is like one of the, not just the strongest the SEC has ever been, this is one of the strongest conferences college basketball has ever seen. So for that reason, Florida winning the SEC tournament, they're always going to have that. Whatever happens here in March, that is quite the accomplishment. And like you kind of said, Dan, they left no doubt. They won 3 games by a combined 45 points and went through good ones. But I do think that Florida was placed appropriately. I know a lot of people disagree, but I do think it's very important to separate how good a team is from what their resume is. You can absolutely argue that Florida is the best team in the country, and you can absolutely, there's a whole bunch of ammunition for that. And you can use the head-to-head win over Auburn to suggest why you think Florida is the best team in the country, but who is best is different from your body of work. And Florida deciding to schedule a bunch of ACC teams that weren't very good and then turn out to be worse than Florida could have even imagined, just left it that there wasn't a lot of meat on the bone, and Florida's resume was large in the SEC, where other teams such as an Auburn had a great resume for what they did in the ACC or SEC, and then also had a bunch of marquee non-conference wins. So again, this will be interesting to see what Florida does this next season, presuming they're feeling pretty confident, because I'm going to bet that they schedule a lot more aggressively and make it so they don't need to run through the SEC and win the SEC tournament just to secure their spot as a 1 seed.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There's a lot of, I mean, when you look at it, the run they had against Alabama, Auburn, also away from home or on neutral sites, is impressive. But it's really the whole body of work that you're saying that the committee looks into. What could Florida have done, if anything? Like, hey, don't lose to Missouri at home, maybe. But like, what could they have done to change? There's only a couple losses to even talk about, but what could they have done to maybe not be the 1-4 and to be the first overall or second overall, outside of, scheduling a little bit tougher early on in the year?
It does come down to scheduling, because in terms of the predictive metrics that come from blowing out really good teams and like Florida did in the SEC, that was all great. And none of those losses, like I saw you searching for a second because you were like, one of those losses, they didn't have bad losses. All of the losses were even the one to Mike White in Georgia that a lot of people didn't like. I mean, that was still a road game in a quad one scenario, like a high value game. So honestly, it wasn't any of the losses that dinged Florida. It was just the fact they didn't have as much on the top end as a Duke, as a Houston, as an Auburn, really even as an Alabama lost a little bit more, which ultimately made the difference there. But that's really the only thing. And again, that's when you're seeding 64 teams and there's a number of great teams vying for the top. I mean, we're kind of, it's small margins here. And if you just schedule more challenging games, you leave yourself a little bit of runway. Florida didn't leave themselves much room, because I don't believe they thought that they were going to be a 1 seed caliber team, or they would have scheduled harder. And they just left themselves in a position where they did have to go through pretty much unscathed. And that's just exactly what they did. They went through unscathed. They blew a ton of really good teams out and still ultimately got a 1 seed. And and I think that when you're a 1 seed, you start to get those favorable matchups in the bracket, to the point where you can certainly look at Florida going on a run.
It stopped me. My basketball, especially college basketball knowledge is a wealth of knowledge. They kind of look like UConn towards the end of last year. Where like UConn, no matter who UConn was playing, they're winning by 10, 11, 12, 15 points. Like Florida's, like you've mentioned, just blowing really good teams out of the water, like taking them out of games. They've started slow. I think they've kind of changed that. Earlier on in the year, they were starting slow, and you'd be like, why does every team have a guy having the game of his life shooting the ball in the first half against us? And then all of a sudden they would put the clamps on in the second half. But it looks like kind of the UConn towards the end of last year, where they're just blowing out really good teams. Like they don't even look competitive towards the end of games.
Yeah, that's something that I think is so impressive. And even you look at that SEC championship game, Rick Barnes, the head coach of Tennessee, went up in the post-game press conference. It was like, I thought we played really well. And I agree with him. I thought Tennessee played one of their best games of the season, and they lost by 9 on a neutral floor. Well, not even a really neutral floor, because in Nashville, it was almost all Tennessee. I mean, there's good Florida contingent, but still, definitely more Tennessee fans. And Tennessee played one of their best games of the season and lost to the Gators by 9. That speaks to what Florida's doing. And again, college basketball is such a long season. And one of the issues we do have when evaluating these teams is, why were some of these teams ahead of Florida? It's because of wins they got in November. That November seems like a world ago. If you're someone who's looking at filling out your bracket and you want to see who can win a championship based on who is playing the best basketball right now, it's pretty universal that Florida's had the best last month of anyone out of this in college basketball. Auburn's kind of limping into and again, they played 2 meaningless games at the end of the SEC regular season where they had already locked up number 1, and they were screwing around and playing different lineups and threw at a zone that sucked, and they just kept it out. So they were messing around a little bit, but it's hard to turn that. It's hard to flick things back on once you've already flipped it off. And you saw that in the SEC tournament where they didn't make it to the championship game. So they're not playing particularly well. Cooper Flagg's banged up for Duke. Houston didn't play in as tough of a league. They kind of do their thing. They play defense and offensive rebound. But Florida, I think by most people's evaluations, would be playing the best basketball right now. And that's really what the goal of the college basketball season is, being so long, is can you play your best basketball in March and head into a 1-game elimination tournament with all kinds of confidence? And I mean, like for Florida, I mean, you run through Missouri and Alabama and Tennessee in the SEC tournament, those are 3 tougher games than they won't, even if they were to get to the national championship game, they're not playing a 3-game stretch as challenging as what they just did. So that doesn't speak to
Norfolk. Norfolk has played in a great season, Eric. Conference champions.
Hey, I'm a big Norfolk State fan. We can get into that, but still, I'm gonna say I'd give Missouri an edge on a neutral floor.
Okay, fair enough.
Fair enough. So I got a question for you, Eric. If you were to pick maybe 2 to 3 teams that possibly could give us a run for our money within this tournament, like who would you be scared of? Who matches up with us size-wise? Because I feel like that's our advantage as Florida. We have size on the floor as well as great perimeter players who can shoot the ball from anywhere. So who do you think in this tournament can really give us a challenge, and who's kind of scaring you moving forward?
So I would say the 2 teams in Florida's region that just might give you a little bit of pause. It would start with Maryland, who they would see in the Sweet 16, likely if Maryland gets there. Okay. They're the one team that, again, you hit the nail on the head. Who has the size to keep up with Florida's front court?
Yeah, like Maryland does. Sizing with us is really nobody can hang with us if they don't got the size.
Yeah, that's it. And Derek Queen is just this outstanding, bouncy, physical, big man, future lottery pick. He is someone who could give the Gator, again, a little bit more just like bulk and physicality than Florida's dealing with, and also still has a lot of skill, can face up. He's a huge challenge. And then Julian Reese, who's the brother of Angel Reese, who a lot of people will be familiar with.
Wow.
So again, he's like 6'9", 250 starting at power. So it's one of the reasons that they were able to roll through their league was they were playing this really dynamic front court that is, dare I say, Florida-esque. So those two players I think are fantastic. Now Florida's guards are much, much better than Maryland. And that's why overall the matchup wouldn't concern me a whole bunch, but that is like the one front court that kind of matches up with Florida's happens to be in their pod. So there's a chance you run into Maryland and you see 2 of the best front courts getting a bunch of offensive rebounds, finishing everything. I think that is one thing to be a challenge. And then I would say the other team is, naturally Florida's the one. I do think the 2 seed St. John's in their pod could give the Gators issues, largely because their guards are so tough defensively and so disruptive. And if you're looking for one reason why Florida might struggle against someone in this tournament, it is the fact that they don't really have a true point guard. Walter Clayton is tremendous. Ball handling is not his forte. And again, it's almost like a joke with a lot of Florida fans that he has like 2 pick sixes a game and it doesn't even matter because he just goes and scores 25 and pulls from the logo. But like he will get his pocket picked clean. He will throw it right into the head. Like it's just, again, Florida doesn't play with a true point guard. And they can struggle with some of these teams that are really, really aggressive. And that is St. John's. St. John's lacks any offensive upside. That's where you just look at Florida shot making and you say, you know what, Walter Clayton could turn it over 6 times and Florida could still win the game. But again, I do think that would be a matchup that would be concerning because of the guards. And St. John's does have good size in the front court, guys that aren't particularly skilled. So guys that could probably slow down a Florida front court, but they're not going to outscore them. They're not going to totally keep them off the glass. But yeah, and again, it's, they're a 2 seed for a reason. And obviously Rick Pitino is Rick Pitino. I think just seeing him, you might bust out the all white suit on the sideline and that'll put some fear into people. While I like this St. John's team, I still think Florida really matches up generally with that, I'll call it genre of team. Like there's a couple teams at the top of college basketball that are like defend really hard, rebound the basketball, play in transition. And I've always thought that Florida really matched up with those teams really, really well. And I think that a perfect example was this Tennessee SEC tournament championship game where Tennessee plays that way and they played awesome and Florida beat them by 9. And I think that was something that kind of reiterated to me that while I think that St. John's could offer problems because of some of their guards' disruptiveness defensively, I really don't think the teams in the like Michigan State, Houston, Tennessee, St. John's, like that like genre of team, I think Florida handles really, really well. So talking about like, did Florida get a good place in the bracket? Did it all work out? I say, yeah, because the 2 seed in the region is a St. John's team that I do think they would match up fairly well with if it came to that to make a Final Four.
I saw an analytic graphic of like where everyone shoots it from. And it's like, it's what you would expect now. Lots of threes and then lots of like right under the rim. St. John's, lots of long 2s. Everyone. Tons of long 2s. Very limited from beyond the arc. looked like a 1970s shot chart. Lots from right around the key. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Rick Pitino just like, you know what? I can't analytics. We're not going to do it.
Eric, I think the team is like built like some of the SEC we're going to play. Like they're really good, that we play like throughout the year. And it seems like we was having like struggles in the first half, but more so as the season went on, to me, it was like, yeah, they may start good, but we played such good defense. How long? Like, because the pressure, there's no drop off when we go to the bench. It's hard for those guys to be able to keep up with our offensive pace facing our defense for 2 halves. And that's been the thing. Even with Tennessee, when they made a run to get back into the game, I didn't even panic because I'm like, the defense is too tough for those guys to keep pace with what we're doing on offense. And I don't see many teams. It's not like we got to play the games, but I don't see many teams that's going to be able to sustain that type of pressure a full game. Even when we get in foul trouble, whoever comes in the game, there's no drop off. Like our subs, to me, there's not a lot of talent drop off on either end of the court.
Yeah, you look at Thomas Houck, who has been, he's Florida's 6th man, but anytime down the stretch, if Florida does play a close game, which doesn't actually happen that often because they usually blow people out, like Houck is on the floor and he's been tremendous and someone who can knock down shots, someone who can handle the ball and drive bigger guys down the lane. And when you look at, Nick, you mentioned some of these analytics that are coming out. One of them that you'll see everywhere too is like Florida's, their best 5 players, which is 4 starters. Plus Thomas Houck in the game for Ruben Chinyelu. That is like one of the best 5-player combinations in all of college basketball. They've just been running everyone out of the gym. And then you still look at some of the other players coming off the bench. Like, and I mean, this is a bigger conversation about who should be eligible or not in college basketball. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but Florida's has a guy coming off the bench named Urban Klobzar, who played for Real Madrid, one of the best teams in the world outside the NBA, in 2020. So he was already playing. So he's been playing professional basketball since 2020 when he was 16 years old.
Good.
So he's been. So this is a guy that like comes off the bench as someone who's got like over 100 international or high level professional games in Spain under his belt. And I mean, like that's Florida's like second guard off the bench sometimes after Denzel Aberdeen. And then something, I mean, I'll mention, it has been an incredible story in a world of NIL and players going to get their own. Micah Hanlockton, coming off the gruesome leg injury, says, I don't really care about getting this year back for a redshirt year. We'll figure that out down the line. I don't care about my earning potential NIL. I'm coming back, even if it means burning one of my years of eligibility. And now the Gators, whose front court was already really good, suddenly has Micah Hanlockton, their starter from last year, coming off the bench. And I've said it a number of times in my writing and podcast, but like Micah Hanlockton is playing significantly better this year than he did last year, which is just unthinkable. Incredible. If you unfortunately saw the injury that he sustained, and even taking it away, he couldn't play for 10 months. And he came back and was already better than the player he was last year, and infinitely more intelligent on the offensive end, and so much more of a weapon there, and physically bigger and stronger and more about. So like, it's just one of those things, like talking about Florida's bench, the way that they have one of the best 6 men in Thomas Houck. They have someone who's gone for 20 in multiple occasions, like a Denzel Aberdeen. They've got like a 4-year Spanish pro in Urban Klobzar, and then they've got Micah Hanlockton, their starter from last. Like the bench is outrageous, and it's just one of those things that I do think depth can be overrated sometimes in the NCAA tournament. There's extra long TV timeouts, so rest isn't as much of a players can play a few more minutes than normal. It's all drawn out, but at the same time, I just think you need dudes ready that can come in and make an impact, because if you're going to win 6 games in a row, you're not going to do it all in the same way. You're going to need to win a game that's in the 60s, and you're going to need to win a game in the 90s. Some of your starter stuff is going to be taken out by scouting. You need weapons off the bench who can come in and make something happen unexpectedly. And, I just mentioned there's 4 guys off Florida's bench that most teams in this tournament would be happy to start. And maybe they're not going to play 6 games of 20 minutes off the bench, really big impact, but Florida needs each of those guys to just have one big moment of 15 minutes off the bench where they knock down a couple shots, get a few key offensive rebounds, make a big play. And it's just, if you're looking for guys that like have that ability to be impacts, to make an impact. Like Florida just like has more bites at the apple than anyone else in this tournament.
So Eric, Norfolk State, I know you said that you liked them. Florida hopefully won't have a problem with them, but what kind of basketball team are they, and what should fans be ready to watch for at 6:50 Eastern time on Friday?
Yeah, so they have an incredible coach named Robert Jones. He's been there for 12 years and he's just 45. Now you guys are going to love this. So he's from South Jamaica, Queens. So when he was in college playing Division III basketball, going into getting into coaching, he was also a promoter for 50 Cent. Before 50 Cent popped up. So Robert Jones has just an incredible story of, he was a guy that was like playing Division III basketball and coaching Division III basketball while promoting for 50 Cent. And again, if that tells you how long he's been in the game, despite being only 45 years old, he was he was doing that before 50 Cent popped off. So tells you a little bit about his personality, but he's an incredible coach.
He was promoting in the club. He's been around the block.
So that's so again, Robert Jones is someone who has turned Norfolk State into just a power in that league. I even suggested that Florida should have interviewed him when they had the opening 3 years ago. He's just running that league and turning it into a position where, like, honestly, if you are looking for a position that Florida got screwed in the bracket, there's no way Norfolk should have been a 16 seed. I think something that you'll see is everyone is kind of picking High Point as that's like everyone's trendiest pick mid-major wise is for High Point to upset Purdue and go on a run. Norfolk State beat High Point earlier in the season on the road. So I think the first thing to kind of look at with Norfolk is just the fact that they have a lot bigger and more athletic players than you would expect from a 16 seed. So they are physically tough. They are bouncy. They've had a ton of highlights all year long from guys throwing down monster dunks, and they play really smart. Like I said, Robert Jones is an incredible coach, and he has those guys playing connected, and they're an amazing cutting team, amazing passing team. The problem with Norfolk State is that league is not very good, and everyone just plays really junky zones. They play really like garbage trapping full court presses, and it's just one of those things that I don't feel like Norfolk State is ever fully prepared to play against high major teams. And while they've been really, really good in the regular season, they made some tournaments. Recently, they've just gotten absolutely thrashed in the first round of the NCAA tournament,
right.
which again, they've built a style that really works to dominate that league. And which again, I think if you're Norfolk State and you're Robert Jones, that's what you do. You build your roster to dominate your league and get to the tournament. You don't build your team to like maybe have a slightly better chance if you see Florida in the first round. So it's one of those things that I think that everyone will really respect watching this game. How hard Norfolk State plays, how intelligent they play, the quality of some of their players. I also do not think it's a team that's going to push Florida. If you're looking for the reason that it might be like, slightly close at the first TV timeout and you're like, oh, why isn't Florida pulled away? They will, again, because of that league they play in, they will throw out a bunch of really novelty kind of zones just to really try to confuse their opponent. And especially going up against Florida, they're not going to try to make it a man-to-man game where you just play conventional basketball against Florida. That's how you lose by 100. So they'll throw the kitchen sink at the Gators, and it'll make for, could make for an interesting 4 or 5 minutes, but ultimately, yeah, Florida, like Nick, you mentioned earlier, Florida just like doesn't have bad losses this year. That's one of the things that the defense and rebounding and size puts Florida's floor just so high that it's just hard to imagine them getting picked off. And so again, really glad everyone is that we're spending 5 minutes time on Norfolk State. Glad people are going to learn about a great team and a great coach, but I don't think you'll be hearing too much about them after their first round game with the Gators.
Well, after that is either Oklahoma or UConn. Florida beat Oklahoma by 22, 85-63 back in the middle of February. Obviously didn't play UConn this year. Not the same, probably, UConn team that's won back-to-back national championships. Because of the familiarity with Oklahoma, would you think that Florida would match up a little bit better against them? Or give us kind of a couple second rundown on that matchup and who you think Florida might stack up better against?
Yeah, Oklahoma's really weird. They have a guy named Jeremiah Fierce who's outstanding. They have Jalen Moore, a forward who's outstanding. And then I think that everyone else on their team is just not high major level players. And you just saw that kind of what Silk was saying, like they kind of hung with the Gators for 10 minutes because their two guys are really good. And then when it came to guys 3 to 9, Florida just completely overwhelmed them. That's the kind of team in the SEC that the Gators have just rolled through this year. And I do think because of the familiarity, that's one that just doesn't scare you a whole bunch. And I do think UConn beats them. I think the Gators will play UConn. But I do think it's very important to just – I'll remind you now, this is not the UConn that was winning back-to-back championships. They have one starter back from last year's team. Other than that, it's all their bench players that have had to take huge steps up, and they did not do very well in the transfer portal. They took a big man from Michigan, who Michigan was pretty much like, please, we'll help you pack on the way out. And then kind of the second or third best player, whatever, from St. Mary's, who was a really good mid-major team on the West Coast, but he was not the engine that made that thing work. And they took him. So that's not going well. So it really is a team in UConn that you just look at their roster and it's just not very talented. And you can obviously look at the head coach, who's done a lot of good things the last 2 years, and have some fear. But I know that there's going to be people that say, like, "Are you kidding me? Florida has to play the 2-time national champions." This is there's
a little PTSD. There's a little PTSD for some older Gators having to see Shabazz. So for the young people in the chat who might have been in diapers when that happened, which makes me feel even grayer than I am. UConn does seem historically a little bit of a boogeyman. Might not be the same 5 or the same 12.
I will never forget Shabazz Napier, not only because of that game, but because LeBron James politicked for the Miami Heat to draft him, and they did, and then he left right after, and then we were stuck with maybe the worst version of Shabazz Napier in his basketball career. So it's go Gators, obviously, always, but especially that one.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think you look at UConn and they're an 8 seed for a reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is that just talent-wise, they're about an 8 seed. They again have great coaching, but again, whether it be the fact that they've won the last 2 national championships or the PTSD that you mentioned, Nick, I don't think that people should be awfully concerned about this UConn team. And I think it'll take 90 seconds from the opening tip for a lot of people to be like, "Wow, Florida is just a lot more talented."
Well, Eric, maybe we can bring you on next week and kind of do a recurring thing. We don't certainly have to go for, 32 minutes again for
we need a full Florida basketball hour here. Get Eric and Neil.
Yeah.
See if they can play enough zone.
Fans love it.
See if we can get enough zone. If they can play enough zone to field our bad basketball questions. If they can swat them away and make us, along with everyone watching us, more knowledgeable.
Oh, Wolf Gator is just having a ball in the comments, man.
Who? Malik
Wolf
Gator's been.
It's Eric's biggest fan, man.
Eric's biggest fan.
All right, on Wolf Gator.
Shout out to the old University of Florida Seal as your profile picture too. Well, Eric, man, we appreciate you as always. Florida Basketball Hour is by far one of the best podcasts that you can listen to just about sports in general, and definitely revolve around the Florida Gators and certainly Florida Gators basketball. So Eric, let everybody know where they can find you on Twitter. Mind you, if you follow Eric on X or Twitter, whatever we're calling it these days, it's going to be highly analytical. You're going to learn some things and you're going to feel stupid at times because Eric will be like, here's this play that is incredible to watch, and be like, man, that just looks like a basketball play to me. But Eric knows how to break it down. So Eric,
some of the names too are wild.
Yeah, the Twitter account has gone quite corporate, I suppose, with the coaching I do outside of covering the Gators. So maybe not the best place to follow me, but if you're a real sicko, Eric Fawcett _ is a place for you. But definitely GatorCountry.com. You can see my writing, and Florida Basketball Hour, the podcast. We also have a Patreon where, again, we do mostly, well, at least I do mostly film stuff. So if you want to, we talked about Norfolk State. If you're someone who wants to see 20 minutes of Norfolk State film breakdown, we do that there. But anyways, yeah, it's been, I mean, I joked about it, but I'm 100% serious. I know you guys had to struggle with some pretty boring segments from 2018 to 2021 or whenever you used to have me on a ton. Yeah. And it's certainly a lot more exciting now. So I hope you guys and everyone that's listening or watching that maybe hasn't been the biggest basketball fan over the last since Billy Donovan. I hope you enjoy getting an opportunity to get back into it.
Well, Eric,
can we get to a point where y'all leave my guy Mike White alone? I just saw
never.
Somebody else.
Big tournament berth for Georgia this year. So he took them to the promised land.
That's crazy. That's crazy. I've spent
They're
many
perfect
days
match for
watching
each other.
an NIT team here at Florida. I'm sure that will get you an extension in Georgia, though.
The first pick I made was Gonzaga over Georgia. I didn't think twice. I didn't look at the analytics. I didn't look at the spread. There's just something about Mike White showing up in whatever city they're going to be with an unprepared basketball team with a 9-minute stretch where they'll have 7 points all by free throws, you know? By the way, Eric,
that's an historic run. 7 points in a 9-minute stretch.
We've got to do something, you and I, not really me, you, about fixing SEC officiating. Absolutely egregious. Some things are getting called, some games, some things aren't getting called. Other games, there was a point in time where there was, I think, 7 or 8 minutes left. There was 46 fouls. I don't even know what they ended up with. The game against Alabama that they won, the last minute and 38 seconds took 19 total, like real life minutes to get through. We've got to do something about basketball, man.
Is Pat Adams on your Christmas card list?
Man, we could talk about college basketball officiating and what we need to. I mean, I'll tell you this quickly. I think the biggest problem with officiating in college basketball is that there's no such thing as SEC refs or Big Ten refs or ACC refs. These guys are all independent contractors that take as many games as they can. So if I were to just pull it up right now, which I could, so like Doug Shows is a name that all the basketball fans listening will not like. So if I pull it up right now, he officiated 84 basketball games this year. 84 basketball games. So usually 6 or 7 a week.
That's a guy that's hungry.
So this is a guy that did Middle Tennessee versus Louisiana Tech in the Conference USA tournament at 3:49 p.m. in Nashville, and then was in Huntsville, Alabama, and he was in Nashville the next day at 7 p.m. for Alabama, Kentucky. And before that, he was in New Orleans. The day before, he was in New Orleans. Those guys.
Nobody knows one.
So I could go on, but if I had to really boil down a lot of the officiating is the fact that the SEC doesn't have SEC officials. They subcontract out to these guys that are doing 80 games a year that are just looking towards their next flight to get which you wouldn't know by how long they really drag out the end of these games with reviews. But these guys are just overworked. Can you imagine going from a Conference USA first round game to an SEC semifinal game? The difference in athletes you're officiating suddenly and having to try to show some level of consistency. It's a major problem. I could go on about this for a long time, but like you said, we're well into longer than you expected to have me on. We certainly don't need to be talking about Conference USA officiating.
I know you would.
Like Eric said earlier, if you want to nerd out, you can follow.
As if there's any doubt.
You can follow him on X. Twitter.
Final question, Eric. Final question. What's the weather in are you still in Edmonton?
Still in Edmonton. Man, it was 37 or 38 today and sunny. It's still cold, man. It's still cold.
Is that
There's still snow on the ground?
38 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Celsius, Nick.
I did it for you.
Yeah, it would be a much tougher situation. We'd have a much different global warming discussion if it was 37 or 38 degrees Celsius. All right, Eric. Well, we appreciate you you coming onto the show again at Eric Fawcett _ on X.